Okay, we now turn our attention to another control structure, and namely the for loop. It turns out that there are two types of loops available in Python. One is the for loop, and the second one is the while loop that we'll look at later. The for loop has the following structure. So the syntax is we start with the keyword for, then we have a variable that is defined within the loop itself, then another keyword in, and then a sequence followed by a colon, and then the block of code to be evaluated over and over. So the whole idea of loops is that there's a block of statement that we evaluate until there's a certain condition that is met. Let me use a simple example to demonstrate the for loop. So now I'm defining a well-known sequence, namely a string. So I'm defining this variable called month, and I'm assigning the month of September to this string. If I want to go through this sequence, I can use the for loop to do it. So I can say for letter in month, and notice the syntax that I'm using here. So I start with the keyword for, the verb is letter, in, the sequence is month, and what I want to do actually, I want to go through and I want to print each letter. Can seem quite trivial here, but you can get the point. So the first time through, letter will be assigned to the first element in the sequence, which is S, and it will print S. Then next time through, letter will be assigned to E, we will print E, and we will do that all the way down to the end of the sequence. So let us run this and see what will happen. So there we go. We have September printing there as expected. So the for loop is a very powerful structure. Now, suppose we want to do something, say, 10 times, okay? It turns out that we have a function called range, and we can use the range function to help us to do that. Now let me show you how we can use the range function. In fact, the range function takes two values. One is the starting value, and then it takes an end value. Okay? So here, let us say I want to print hello, and I want to do this, say, 5 times. I can use the for loop, and I can say for, and then I'm going to use the variable I. Say for I in range, so I'm going to start at 0, and I want to end at 5. I just want to say something about the range function here. It turns out that the first time I will be assigned to 0, next time I will be assigned to 1, and it will go all the way up onto 4. Okay, so it starts at the start value and it stops just before the end value. And here I just want to print hello. Okay, so let's evaluate this and see what will happen. So there we go, September is printed just as we had before, and then we have hello printed 5 times. Okay, now I have a challenge for you. I want you to write a program that will print the square numbers from 0 to 10 inclusive. I'm going to give you a hint on this one. Remember that a number squared is just the number multiplied by itself. So it's just the number multiplied by itself, and that is the number squared. So I want you to use the for loop. I want you to use the range function, put that together, and I want you to write a program that will print the square numbers from 0 to 10. Good luck. Okay, now for the solution. So I want to write a program that will print the square numbers from 0 to 10. So clearly we're using the for loop. And here we're going to say for number, which is a variable, in range, and we want to start at 0. We're going to have to go up to 11, seeing that the end value, the range function, will stop just before the end value. And we want to go from 0 to 10. So in the range function, we're going to have to send 11 as our ending value, and that's really important. And then what we want to do is just to print here, we just want to print the number times the number. And that should achieve our objective here. Let us run that and see the output. So there we go. So we're printing from 0. So 0 squared is 0 all the way up to 100, which is 10 squared. We can make our output a little more meaningful. So I'm just going to say here number squared is, and then here number times number. So in this case, so the first time through, we're going to say 0 squared is 0 times 0, which is 0. Second time through, 1 squared is 1 times 1, which is 1. And all the way up to 10 squared, which is 100. So we save this file, we run it, and we're getting a more meaningful output. So 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, and so forth. Okay? So here we're using the for loop and a very powerful control structure here. Now, going back to the previous chapter, can we make this a little more interesting? In particular, can we define a function? So I want to define a function called squared up to. And this function should take an integer value as its input. And it should print the squared number from 0 up to the given number. In fact, we're going to modify this slightly. We're not going to only define the function to do it, but we're going to ask the user to enter the number to square it to. So to square it up to. So for example, the user should be prompted to say, please enter a number to be squared up to. If the user enters 12, then we should define a function called squared up to that takes 12, and it should print the squared numbers up to 12. So think about this carefully. You're using the for loop, and the input statement here, the input function would be quite handy here. So look back at the video and have a go at this challenge. Good luck. Okay, let's look at the extended for loop solution. So we want to ask the user to enter a number to squared up to. So I'm defining a variable called number here. I'm using the input function here, and I'm going to say a prompt here, please enter a number to square up to. Similar to what we've encountered before, the data type that we'll get from input is a string, and so we're going to have to convert it to an integer because we're really keen on getting an integer now. So up to this point, we have an integer that the user is going to enter. Now we want to define a function, so we go ahead and we're saying we're defining the function. The name of the function is squared up to, squared up to will take one input, and that's a number. So I'm going to use the placeholder here. My parameter is going to be num. Okay, so I'm defining the function squared up to that takes one value, which is num. And then here I'm going to go into my for loop, and I'm going to say for value in, and here I need to have my range function. I'm always going to start at 0, and I'm going to end at num, and this is where I'm using my formal parameter of num that I sent to the function. So for value in range from 0 to num, here I want to do a similar thing to what I did earlier. I want to print here, and I'm going to say value squared is, and here it's going to be value times value. So similar to what we've done before, we're saying that we want to print the value squared is value times value, and that should be our for loop, and that should be the definition of our squared up to function. Okay, so basically we're taking the input in, we're defining the function. If I just use a few comments here, find the squared up to function. Oh, sorry, my spelling getting mixed up there. So define my square up to function. So that is the function definition. And in fact, I'm just going to move this input statement here. I'm going to put it here, and then once I have my number, then it's time for me to use my function definition. So I'm going to use my print statement here, and I'm going to call my squared up to function, and as my argument to my squared up to function, I'm going to send number. And number here is the value that the user enters. Now let us save this file and run it to see what our output will be. Okay, so here we see, please enter a number to square up to, and let us try 12, and then enter. And then here we're saying 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, and then we notice something peculiar here. We're going up to 11 squared is 121. And for those of you following clearly, you'd have realized that I'm stopping at num, which is 12 in this case. And what I said earlier is that the range function will stop, in fact, not at 12, but it will stop 1 before 12, which is 11. And that's exactly why in the output we are having 11 squared is 121. So it turns out that for us to get an accurate solution, we're going to have to say num plus 1 within the range function, and that should give us the squared up to 12 and including 0. So let us run this and see if this will give us the correct output. So please enter a number to square up to, going for 12 again, and there we go, 0 all the way up to 12. And this is a good example of how it is really important for us to test our code as we go along. So we test the code, we look at the output to see if that is the output that we're expecting to have. Okay? just reflect on this code, have a look at it, and see what else you could use the for loop for. Good luck.